Hi, I'm Atomicus from OWKings.com, and today I'll talk about Pharah on Dorado, anything from team compositions to different engagement angles and whatnot. As of yet, Pharah works against certain compositions, primarily ones that don't have that many hitscan heroes such as McCree, Widowmaker, and Soldier 76. Before we continue, make sure you check out the main guide for Pharah, since I'll skip the basic stuff about her in this video. Dorado is a great map for Pharah since it offers a variety of flanking paths, solid high ground positions, but also choke points that helps her punish the enemy team if they don't have any shields. As per usual, I'll cover the attack side in the beginning. First of all, I'll talk about the comps that helps Pharah the most on this map. The standard dive comp can be used on this map with some small changes to the team roster. D.Va, Winston, Genji, Ana, and Lucio or Zen can easily help Pharah secure the needed kills on any hitscan heroes that might contest her. Zen can potentially help much more than Lucio can in the end, especially on non-King of the Hill maps. Replacing Ana with a Tracer can also work if you feel strong about your DPS players, and the potential snowball momentum with this roster can become quite high. This is a comp that is very strong against poke comps, the ones that include snipers or key targets. This dive comp is quite common on the first point of Dorado due to the main choke point that it has. You can dive on a certain enemy and burst him down with your mobile roster of heroes. In this case, since you're playing Pharah, you want to dive the hitscan heroes that can potentially contest you. The other comp that is usually used on hybrid and payload maps involves Reinhardt, Soldier 76, Zarya, Ana, and Zen or Lucio. This comp is more about winning the shield battles and dealing damage from afar as Pharah. You can still engage if you have a Lucio, but you'll usually be alone if you decide to flank. Now keep in mind that you should consider your options based on your current comp, and that throughout the match you'll have to adopt a different approach for each point, as the enemy team might swap their team composition to something different to potentially counter you. Starting off on attack, there's a couple of paths that you can use as Pharah for the first point. The main path can be used for scouting and when the enemy team doesn't have any hitscan heroes that can contest you in the first place. Usually the enemy team will be holding the high ground on the left side, so you can try to push them off with your concussive blast if they don't have any shields up there. Sometimes you can even find some enemy players sitting on the roof of these buildings, so you should be extra careful when you're flying around here in the beginning. The safest path that you can take is the one far right, which leads to one of the ways you'll be able to flank the enemy team. From here you can also just continue towards the main choke point and try to contest the high ground. You can peek around the buildings and rooftops in this area in order to scout or potentially snipe any enemies without exposing yourself too much. Peeking from here can also work, though as your team pushes towards the market, some enemy players might try to flank by going through here, so be careful not to get picked off by surprise. Once your team managed to break through the choke point, you won't have much cover above the market, so you should focus any hitscan heroes as soon as possible before they can pick you off. The only bit of cover you can use is the statue and the rooftops on the sides of the market. Going back to the flanking path I was talking about earlier, getting over this wall can help you secure certain picks depending on the enemy comp. For example, if they have a Widowmaker, she will usually be on top of the gate, so this is the fastest way to get here and easily kill her. Dealing with a Tourbillon turret or Symmetra generator / teleporter can also be achieved from here. Just be careful whenever you go through here, since you'll usually be alone and you won't have much help besides the mega health bank that's on the other side of the wall. Moving on to the second point of the map, once again the focus should be on contesting the high ground. The enemy team will most likely hold up here, and if they have any hitscan heroes, they will occasionally show up from the other side. Your primary job here is to poke at any enemies that are holding the high ground and even push them off with your concussive blast. In terms of cover, you can sit here and also fly above the church. Just remember to keep track of any hitscan heroes, since they can easily pick you off if you're not careful. If the enemy team decides to drop down and contest the payload, you can just take the high ground for yourself and help your team from above. Another way of getting up there is by going through the church. This will allow you to surprise most of the players that are holding up here. Just be careful not to stay indoors for too long once you've been detected, since Pharah suffers from small areas. Once the payload is under the bridge, some of the enemy players might hold the high ground on the other side. Because of this, you must be extra careful on how you'll expose yourself during the fights. If you have a dive comp, then you can try diving anyone holding up there, or you can try taking care of things yourself by sneaking through the bottom right side. The enemy team might just hold the same high ground as before, so in the end, you just have to react accordingly to how the enemy team is holding this point. Best way of dealing with both sides without exposing yourself much is by sneaking either through the bank or the path I talked about earlier. Remember that you can also just knock the enemies off so that they lose the high ground immediately. The third and final point for Dorado is somewhat tricky for Pharah. There's a lot of free space which any hitscan heroes can benefit from, and there aren't that many safe paths that you can take without exposing yourself to some of Pharah's weaknesses. The enemy team will be holding the high ground, and most teams will try to contest the high ground by going upstairs through the right side. You can try to slowly push together with your team through here by just spamming rockets, and hopefully you'll push the enemy team back enough to go in. It's pretty hard to use your concussive blast without exposing yourself here, so be careful since you need to fly high to be able to get a reliable blast. Being in the far back and just shooting rockets can also work, since usually the support heroes will be holding in the far back of the corridor. However, this will not work very well if they have shields up there. From here you can also just flank from the left side, though you'll usually be alone without much support, so the only thing you'll be able to do is just poking them from afar and annoy them while your team is pushing through the main area or the high ground. There's also a risky path that you can take which can heavily reward you or brutally punish you depending on how the enemies are positioned. By going through here, you can either flank the high ground by going all the way in the far back, or by just using your jump jet to get near any key enemies that are holding up here, such as supports or hit scan heroes. Once you've secured some picks and the payload is getting closer to the final destination, you can either just shoot rockets from the high ground, or you can fly above the final point while using the roof as cover. If you're conserving your jet fuel properly, you can infinitely fly above and the respawning enemies will be too busy trying to contest the payload instead of taking care of you. In terms of using your barrage on Dorado while attacking, due to the open space for all points, you won't stay alive long enough to get many kills with it. Because of this, the focus should be on just using it for 1 or 2 key targets whenever you manage to flank them. This will usually happen on the second and last point of the map using some of the paths I've talked about earlier. Overall, Pharah can be very hard to play on Dorado, especially on attack because of all of the open space and high ground that hit scan heroes can take advantage of, but it can still work depending on how careful you are and how good their hit scan players are. When it comes to defending, not much changes since the same rules apply. The difference is that you start off on the high ground for free, so you have a big advantage over hit scan heroes like Soldier 76 and McCree. As always, try to get some rockets off before the start of the round, since you can gain a significant amount of ulti charge if they all walk through the door at once without any shields. For the first point, you can sit on the rooftops in the early stages, but you should only do this if you have a mercy or a flanker supporting you, otherwise you won't be able to stay there for long. If you manage to hold the rooftops, then you can deal with heroes like Hanzo or Widowmaker much easier when you're denying them the high ground. Basically, your early job is to deny the high ground for any flankers while poking the enemy team as they're pushing the payload. Once your team started holding the choke point, the main thing you can do here is patrol from left to right while peeking above the roof to scout and poke the enemy team. You have to punish anyone who's trying to flank or push on their own. Depending on what comp they have, you might even need to pay attention to the flanking path in the back. Genji, Widowmaker and Pharah can easily get over that wall and pick off some of your teammates if you're not careful enough. Fighting around the market is the same as an attack, except that you can also use the high ground above the gate so you can shoot rockets towards the back line or anyone near the payload. Just be careful for any hit scan heroes that might pick you off from afar. The second point is pretty straightforward, and the main focus is about positioning yourself properly accordingly to how the enemy team is going to attack. If they have a dive comp, then you can try baiting them to dive the high ground while you're getting back enough to not be in harm's way. If they're trying to just push the payload without contesting you while you have the high ground, then your team should engage on the payload so you can take advantage of this. You should come on top of every battle if they don't contest you or the high ground in any way. Remember that some enemies might flank through the church or from the far left side, so be careful not to get jumped on while you're holding here. You should also not peek often when they have a Widowmaker, since she can easily kill you while she's sitting on top of the gate or from the garden area. Just play smart and use the cover to your advantage. Best way to deal with snipers is to have your team play aggressive and not allow the enemy team to just poke you from afar. This way, your team can offer you a potential chance on getting closer to the Widowmaker to pick her off. Once the payload gets under the bridge, expect the enemy team to push from two directions, either from the main road or from the other side. They can also rotate through the church from the left side so they can test the high ground from you. At this stage, your job is to scout how the enemy team will push and take advantage of the high ground accordingly. If they have any hit scan heroes, sometimes they will try to flank on their own from the left side so they can use their ulti, which can be devastating if your team doesn't see it coming. So yeah, overall, you'll just rotate between the church and the two high ground areas while dealing with the enemy team or any players that try to flank on their own. Remember to always go for the hitscan heroes since they can deal a lot of damage if left unchecked with all this high ground available during teamfights. The third and final point can be somewhat easier on defense than on attack, mostly because the enemy team will need to contest the high ground, and if they want to come upstairs, you'll be able to easily spam rockets in the doorway. If they're trying to push the payload through the main area, just use the high ground to your advantage, but be careful not to overextend and get picked off from afar. You should check the enemy team's composition often so you don't get any unpleasant surprises at this stage. You can also flank from the right side if you notice they have any support or long-range hitscan heroes in the backline by themselves. When it comes to contesting the payload when it's close to the final point, safest bet is by approaching from the left or right side. Going from the left side will allow you to contest the high ground, which you can use against the enemy team, while the right side will allow you to approach the payload without exposing yourself to the enemy's backline. In the end, it depends on how far the payload is, so use these options accordingly. Using your barrage on defense is similar to how you would use it on attack, mostly when you have the opportunity to flank or when you've had the chance to get close to any key heroes. Usually it's better to just keep the high ground advantage than to risk dying from using your barrage even if you get a few kills with it. The attacking team will have the advantage of respawning quicker unless they're close to the end of a point. And there you have it. This brings us to the end of another Pharah guide, this time on Dorado. Remember that Dorado is a strong map for both Pharah and hitscan heroes, so if you feel like you're getting heavily contested by them when playing Pharah, then consider swapping to a different hero. I hope that you've learned some new things from this guide, and as always, thank you for watching and I wish you a good one. Take care.